Hello and welcome to the LLG vlog. I'm Deborah Evans, LLG's Chief Executive, and joining me today is Dennis Hall, LLG's Bulletin Editor.
Hello, Deborah.
Well, hello, Dennis. Now, there's been a lot in the news this week about financial statements, financial settlements, but what do the latest announcements actually mean for councils? So should we start off? Do you want to just recap what has been announced this week?
Well, if I may, yes, I'd like to do that, Deborah, but can I give a little backdrop to all of this, because I think it's important. You know, local government finance really does matter to all of us, doesn't it? It determines the level and nature of activity in our sector, so this should matter to all of our members. But commentators all agree on a number of things. Just before I get into the introductory remarks on this, a solution is needed to the huge deficits that councils are running, because we've had historic numbers of Section 114 notices in recent years. We've never seen anything like it before. And we've seen councils speculating in property investments to make ends meet. But commentators say there are two issues. First, the financial framework is flawed and it needs to be fundamentally revalued and reassessed. The basis of funding needs to change, and that is what these announcements do address. And second, the levels of funding over the last 14 years have never been wholly sufficient by any means in face of soaring demand. But that is something this announcement, in my view, doesn't particularly address. So what have we seen? We've seen with the announcement this week that council funding is to be redirected from England's rich areas to the most deprived, and that is to be the new basis on which funding is to take place in future years. There was an announcement as well, Deborah, of a consultation next month on its long-term proposals to fundamentally improve the way in which the sector is funded, moving away from what they describe as an outdated and inefficient approach. This has seen some councils have increases in reserves, while others have struggled deeply with managing and balancing their budgets. There'll be no more competitions for separate pots of money, government funding, as we saw under the last government. Now, we also saw announcements that there's going to be a relaxation allowing councils to raise council tax in certain circumstances, which the announcement said will be on a case-by-case basis. The other key thing I took from the announcements, Deborah, although you may have others that you wish to highlight, some extra funding was announced, but many people will be asking whether this is anywhere near enough. The core spending power will be increased to around 3.2% for councils. There's a new £600 million recovery fund. This was mentioned in the grapevine by you, and also an extra £250 million for children's social care. So those were the main things I took from the announcements, Deborah.
But I'm interested on your perspective, Dennis, whether in the main this is about additional new funding or whether it's about redistributing existing funding in a different way. So you mentioned a couple of specific examples there where they've said that there will be more money, but for general council services, are we going to see an uplift in money that will match the increase in demand that we have seen?
Well, you're absolutely right, Deborah. That's the central question. None of the amounts of money that we've heard the government talk about are in any way transformative in nature. We will have to wait and see. What these announcements tell us is that the priorities for the government are these. They want to get the system right. They want to get the basis of assessment of funding right. And they're going to look at the most deprived areas as a priority. That is all understandable. But as we may come on to discuss, a number of commentators have queried whether this is the right way to go ahead. You know, that is as it is. But the funding at the moment is not, in my view, in any way transformative in nature.
And I'm interested in the use of that word transformative, because in many cases, this is what councils actually need. It's not a case of doing more of the same. They need to be able to invest to do things differently. And I'm thinking specifically around digitisation, for example. There's still a lot of councils out there that have paper deeds, paper archives. It all needs to be electronic. It all needs to be accessible. They need to be using AI in ways that will increase their speed of administration and lower the costs. But all of these things require investment, which requires money and skills. So is that sort of transformation being discussed?
As far as I can see, no. The priority of government is to try and get the system right. They've said that they want to have a consultation. And it's interesting you mentioned the digitisation issues, because these are being discussed now. But the government hasn't gone straight into dealing with the issue of local government finance reform. Much parliamentary time has been spent on a lot of other things. We're 5 months into this government. People's lives would have been changed far more, potentially, if local government finance had been a key priority from day one. I think it has, but the government is slowly moving towards addressing the issue. And there's been a sense, in my view, of some degree of avoidance of all those other issues that are going around local government at the moment, like digitisation, AI in particular. There was an article in the press over the weekend that nationally public services are generally not in a fit state to address this because of lack of resources. I think there will be a lot of disappointment in our sector by these announcements. People are still hopeful that they will lead to change, but this thing is not being dealt with any great sense of speed, it seems to me. A consultation suggests to me that there is a lack of leadership on this issue. There might be a sense of if you like, avoidance of it before things get worse, frankly.
Mm. Yeah, you feel that there's a need to say something, but not necessarily the right thing. It doesn't sound like a holistic approach to fixing the resource issues in local government to me, which is really what's needed.
Yes.
I think it's also important to remember that this statement is not in isolation to all of the other policies that the government are bringing in. So things like the increase in living wage, for example, and we already know about the increase in national insurance, etc. So that local government come under threat from other directions. I know there's been talk about making sure that that doesn't impact negatively, but there is a lot of change going on, and there is a lot of new initiatives that need resourcing. And obviously that resourcing requires investment and it requires skills. So that I'm kind of awaiting, in my case, for this whole bigger picture mentality to emerge. So tell me, what's Angela Rayner been saying on this?
Well, as you would expect, government ministers are still concerned with this theme of legacy, aren't they? The idea that they need to rebuild so many things that are important in public services and elsewhere. There's the key issue that they raise about the £22 billion deficit they say the last government left. And in that sort of theme, she said last Thursday that these proposals were billed as an attempt to fix the foundations of local government, and make funding more effective by ensuring that high needs in terms of adult social care, child protection, get a fair share of funds. She also said that for too long, councils have been let down by an outdated and inefficient system, which has led to public services creaking and taxpayers' money not being spent efficiently. So clearly the emphasis on structural reform. Now, it's got to be transformative. It's got to work, Deborah, because the level of deficits is absolutely huge. Social care, special educational needs, children's services, homelessness, these are big ticket issues for our sector, as our members well and truly know. And Angela Rayner said, well, there is no magic wand to fix what we've inherited, but they say they're taking the necessary steps to fix the foundations of local government, there's that word again, by creating a fairer system. Well, fairness is in the eye of the beholder, Deborah. We will just have to hold our breath, wait and see.
I don't think you need a magic wand. I think you need a strategy and a plan. And I don't necessarily think that either moving money around or throwing money at it without a plan is the answer. But don't get me wrong, this is at least a step in the right direction. But I think more thought is required. So what do the ministry think about this then, Dennis?
Well, just before I go on to that, you're absolutely right. This is redistribution, not transformation. This is not this is not the whole picture, surely, and we need to know far more. And many commentators will be waiting and seeing. Well, the ministry echoed much of what Angela Rayner said. The government, the ministry says, is under no illusions about the scale of the issues facing local government. And the settlement, the 3.2 increase, will begin to address the pressures that councils are under. But as I say, many people will be saying, well, not by much. But they emphasise this as a long-term project to deliver financial security for councils, and they recognise that we may see some continued instability as we adjust to the new system. Now, this question of instability is interesting. The government has chosen to announce, and we'll see more of this in the white paper just before Christmas, we think, not just new devolution measures, but also reorganisation. And many people will question what amount of stability local government reorganisation will actually bring. In my experience, it brings the opposite. It brings a lack of morale in some cases and uncertainty for months and possibly years that will distract people from the delivery of services for quite some time. So, there are some issues around that. The other thing the ministry said, the proposed new funding system for 2026 to 2027 will be heavily weighted around deprivation. Well, clearly there are going to be some winners and losers in relation to that, and it's bound to trigger a lot of criticism from political opponents.
Well, the thing with taking money from more affluent councils to councils that have deprivation is you could end up inadvertently creating new deprivation areas elsewhere. So I think this does have to be done with care. Clearly, we can't just move the deck chairs around the Titanic. As you commented on, so many councils are actually in dire financial need. This isn't people whining, this is the reality, that they do not have sufficient money to run the services. But more money without transformation is not necessarily the answer. But yeah, more money is obviously better than less, but it is that transformation that's needed. So presumably there's been quite a bit of external reaction to this story then, and a few people have undoubtedly come out to comment. So are people agreeing with us, Dennis, or are you seeing some diversity of comment coming through?
Well, Deborah, perhaps as you might expect, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Tim Oliver, of the chair of the County Councils Network, I don't think he's convinced. He said, whilst deprivation is a key indicator of council need, it is not the only indicator, nor the most important measure of financial distress. He says the reality is that it is demand and market failure across adult and children's social care and special educational needs services that are pushing councils to the brink. And also there was a comment from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. David Phillips said the changes made for the coming year suggest these longer-term changes will have an emphasis on redistribution. Well, yes, we've heard that, to the more deprived areas to offset cuts that bore the brunt of during the 2010s. Whether that is fair, of course, is in the eye of the beholder. And there have been other comments as well. I suppose on the other side of things, Kevin Hollinrake, a rather robust shadow local government secretary, said the government are also sticking two fingers up to the rural areas through the scrapping of the Rural Services Delivery Grant and almost certainly reallocating it to Labour strongholds. He finishes, if you thought Labour had finished taxing you, think again.
I'm sure that's the case. Now, the former Community Secretary, Michael Gove, admitted back in September that local government had taken an unfair and disproportionate share of austerity and had suffered. So is that something you would agree with then, Dennis?
It may well be true, yes. I think that there have been legacy issues that have certainly come into the current day thinking that's motivated the changes that we've seen in these announcements. But my main point, Deb, has got to be the government really have got to get on with this and grasp the nettle. There are often contradictory sort of views expressed by this government, aren't there? They're bearing down and saying there should be savings from public sector. That was in the newspapers this week. But really, this is not a sector where you can expect savings, not in local government. It's really the well is already very dry as far as local government finance is concerned. We're looking for regeneration. And we really need true leadership from the government because the government will be judged. It's the major benchmark, local government finance reform. Many people will judge the government on how they deliver this.
Absolutely. And I think even Michael Gove acknowledged that local government had taken on an unfair and disproportionate share of the burden of balancing the budget. And obviously there's an even bigger hole in the budget now to be balanced. And that really needs to stop. And obviously we have regional disparities as well, which has been commented on. So from our perspective, this is about looking, as you say, at more than deprivation as an indicator. This is about looking at transformation of local government to make it a more efficient, sustainable machine, and actually thinking more widely and more holistically about what the sector needs. So I think on that note, it's goodbye from me.
And from me too. Bye now.
Thank you for listening.